Good evening and welcome to the Inside Scope, where we go beyond the headlines to bring you in-depth analysis on the stories that matter the most. I'm Jacqueline Kitamba, and tonight we take a closer look at the biggest issues shaping our world today. Stay with us for exclusive reports. You can join the conversation by following us on Facebook, X and Instagram. Our handles are at Inside Scope and the hashtag is #InsideScopeLive. On to our first story. The escalating violence from the Democratic Republic of Congo has forced thousands to flee their homes. The M23 rebels have launched a series of offensives across the eastern regions, seizing key cities and displacing entire communities. As conflict intensifies, families are embarking on dangerous journeys to seek refuge in neighboring countries like Rwanda, Uganda, and Burundi. Many arrive with little or nothing at all other than their clothes on their backs, only to find overcrowded camps with severe shortages of food, clean water, and medical aid. Our reporter Samira Mohammed has the latest on this.
Forced to flee their homes with little to no belongings, many now find themselves crammed into overcrowded refugee camps where survival is a daily struggle. With limited access to food, clean water, and medical care, families are left in a state of profound uncertainty. Parents worry about their children's future as education is disrupted and basic necessities become luxuries. These camps, originally designed as temporary shelters, are now filled with people who have nowhere else to go. Yet, despite their hardships, they continue to hold on to hope. Tonight, we bring you their stories, the voices behind the statistics, the resilience behind the suffering.
Masasi kaanza na 22h ya usiku. Selifika asubuhi saa 11 saa 12 tukaanza wai kukuya kuvuka ku Rusizi. Tulivuka Rusizi tukafika hapa Rugombo le 14. Ndio tulifika hapa Rugombo, ilikuwa siku ya posho.
Innocent lives shattered by war, families torn apart, children robbed of their childhood, and communities forced into exile. The people you see in these camps once had homes, jobs, and even aspirations. Now, they navigate an uncertain existence, waiting for peace, waiting for stability, waiting for a chance to rebuild.
This country, despite its best efforts, was not prepared for this emergency. Humanitarian agencies are working round the clock. My colleagues are working Monday to Saturday, 6 days out of 7, at Rugombo, making sure that people are registered, trying to fasten the process so that they're moved to the refugee sites.
Children, some as young as 5, wander through makeshift settlements with no access to schools or safe spaces to play. Mothers struggle to feed their infants as food rations run dangerously low. Medical facilities are overwhelmed and diseases spread quickly in these cramped and unsanitary conditions. Relief organizations are working tirelessly, but the scale of crisis is overwhelming.
Some of the factors that are driving the migration from the eastern parts of Congo, especially Goma and Bukavu country, is the insecurity. This is the insecurity that has been caused by M23 advancements because it has led to mass killing of people. Several reports have been heard that people have been killed in the fighting. So people have had absolutely no choice. So as you've said, rightfully said, it is forced migration. So people are moving away from these conflict zones and seeking, some are moving to Burundi, some are moving to Rwanda, some are moving into the interior parts of Congo, all just seeking that secure environment. So it is the conflict that is leading to that forced migration.
For many, the trauma of war is not just a memory, it is a reality they wake up to every single day. And as the crisis deepens, one question remains: how long must they wait for the world to take notice? Samira Mohammed reporting for the Inside Scope.
And now our correspondent Samira Mohammed joins us live. Samira, what are the immediate needs and challenges faced by the host countries as they accommodate these refugees?
Yes, Jackie, host nations are grappling with significant economic strains and social integration challenges where basic services are stretched thin and the influx of refugees places immense pressure on infrastructure and resources. Yeah.
And what about the legal dimensions? How are international laws shaping the responses to such large-scale displacements?
International legal frameworks mandate that nations must uphold the principle of non-refoulement, ensuring that refugees are not returned to situations where their lives are at risk. However, you find that enforcement and compliance vary, often complicating the protection of displaced populations.
Now, do you believe that there is a shared responsibility amongst nations to address these root causes and provide refuge to those in need?
I mean, absolutely. The international community must foster cooperation, solidarity, and sustainable solutions in order to support both the refugees and the community, the host community that is. Addressing the drivers of displacement requires concerted efforts and long-term commitments.
Well, thank you so much, Samira, for your insight on this complex issue. We are now joined by Dr. David Wambulwa, a lecturer at Daystar University, who will help us shed more light on this crisis. Daktari, karibu sana. Now, maybe you could start by explaining to us how has the influx of refugees from Eastern DRC affected neighboring countries? What economic, social, and political challenges does this pose?
One aspect of the internationalization of conflict is in the refugee outflow from the DRC. That the neighboring countries have had to welcome and host these refugees because the DRC is no longer safe for them to stay. So that is one challenge that neighboring countries are having.
How is the ongoing migrations influencing regional security and diplomatic relations?
The wider perspective to this conflict is that it is creating tensions among regional states. You can see how the DRC and Rwanda are struggling in terms of their diplomacy. DRC is accusing Rwanda of arming the Banyamulenge, the M23. Rwanda is accusing DRC of decimating a population which is actually Congolese in all sense.
Now, what role should international organizations such as the UNHCR and even the AU play in addressing the crisis?
Any international intervention in the DRC, it has always been guided by a United Nations security mandate. And there is a series of resolutions on MONUSCO, that MONUSCO has to do this, MONUSCO has to do that, not just to stabilize the conflict, but also to look at cases of, for example, humanitarian support, looking at stabilization, meaning that make sure that the government in Kinshasa is capable of managing the country, providing relief services, ensuring that refugees and displaced persons get help to settle back.
Now, moving on to a global growing challenge, the very foundation of international cooperation is being tested as nationalism rises across the world. From the trade disputes to weakened alliances, many world leaders are struggling to find common ground on the pressing global issues. The United Nations once a beacon of diplomacy, now faces increasing divisions amongst its member states, rising concerns about the future of international governance. Our reporter, Zakaria Abbas, with the details.
With major powers prioritizing domestic interests over collective action, the question remains, can multilateralism survive, or are we witnessing a shift towards a more fragmented world order? For decades, global institutions like the UN, the World Trade Organization, and the G20 have played key roles in maintaining peace and stability. But today, these structures are being challenged like never before. We take a closer look at how rising nationalism, trade wars, and diplomatic tensions are eroding the trust in international cooperation. Across the world, nationalism is reshaping politics. Countries that once championed global unity are now prioritizing sovereignty, retreating from international commitments and putting domestic interests first. Brexit, the rise of protectionism, and increasing skepticism towards multinational agreements signal a shift in global priorities. Trade, once a binding force among nations, has now become a battleground. Tariffs, sanctions, and economic retaliation are now replacing negotiation and compromise. The US-China trade war, supply chain disruptions, and growing tensions between economic powerhouses are eroding the trust in institutions like the World Trade Organization.
There's nothing worse for the economy than inactivity, and that is what we're the most worried about.
Diplomacy, once a cornerstone of global problem solving, is weakening. Military force and economic coercion are becoming the preferred tools of influence. Geopolitical rivalries are escalating, with nations bypassing diplomatic channels in favor of unilateral action. Yet, even as global cooperation weakens, challenges that require collective action, such as climate change, pandemics, and humanitarian crises, continue to grow. Without strong international leadership, the world faces an uncertain future. The decline of global cooperation raises critical questions. Will nations find new ways to work together, or are we entering an era of division? The answer may determine the future of our world. Reporting for the Inside Scope, I'm Zakaria Abbas.
Now, to help us break down this issue, we are joined by Saj Kahozi, a student of international relations. Mr. Saj Kahozi, what are the main factors, according to you, that are driving the decline of the global corporations, and how did we reach this point?
All right, so there are several factors that are driving the decline of multilateralism. So one that is quite prominent is the rise of nationalism and protectionism policies and tendencies, especially among the most powerful countries in the world. So, for example, the United States has recently adopted an American First policy under Donald Trump, whose MAGA movement really advocates for nationalist and protectionist policies. In Britain, we're seeing the rise of Britain moving away from the European Union under Brexit. In India, we're also seeing nationalistic and India First policies. It's literally across the world, right? We're seeing a rise in nationalist and protectionist tendencies.
How have international institutions like the UN, the WTO, even the G20 struggled to adapt to rising nationalism and geopolitical tensions?
All right, as I said earlier, let's start with the United Nations, for example. At the United Nations Security Council, nationalism plays a very important role because, as we all know, states use international organizations and multilateral agreements to advance their national interest. Now, in as far as the United States and other countries in the Security Council have differences, as they advance their national interests at that international level, multilateralism will inevitably be affected. So, a resolution that is anti or viewed to be anti-Israel in as far as the conflict is concerned will never be approved by United Nations. So that becomes a problem.
What are some of the economic consequences of trade wars and protectionist policies on both developed and developing nations?
Well, Jacqueline, that question could not have been more timely. No, if you had asked me this question or any other person in this field a week ago, the same question, the answer would have been totally different from the answer I'm about to give you now. Now, yesterday, President Donald Trump announced some significant tariffs on every single country in the world. So they have what they're calling a baseline tariff of 10% on every single imported good into the United States. Now, in addition to that, other countries are getting extra tariffs imposed upon them. So countries like South Africa are getting 30% tariffs on every single good that is going into the United States. Now, the consequences of this, according to the likes of Trump, they want to believe that this will help boost manufacturing in the United States, that this would somehow help these companies bring their factories into the United States. Now, in the short run, that will definitely not be the case. There will be economic pain in both developing and developed countries. The consumers will have to bear the impact of these tariffs. Now, the consumer again will have to, who imports and exports, is the one who will be significantly affected. Now, in the long run, maybe factories might come in. Now, what is undoubted is that in the short term, there will definitely be pain, especially to the ordinary consumers, both in the developing and the developed countries.
Now, according to you, do you see that are there any emerging alliances or alternative models of cooperation that could replace traditional multinational institutions?
All right, as I've said, these tariffs wars are offering the African countries an opportunity, and not just the African countries, but the developing countries, an opportunity to form other alliances that are not Western-led multilateral alliances. One such model or one such approach is the BRICS, right? BRICS standing for Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. So they've also incorporated other countries into this arrangement. One of the big policies they have is the de-dollarization of international trade. They are seeking to trade in their own local currencies and removing the dollar from the equation. Now, this will be very important, especially for the developing countries, because Western-led multilateralism has faced serious questions, and thus far isn't really bringing development as was initially intended. So BRICS, for example, we are still yet to see whether or not BRICS will bear the fruit or the economic benefit that developing countries are seeking to receive.
Lastly, Mr. Kahozi, looking ahead, do you see a path toward renewed global cooperation, or are we entering a more fragmented and unstable era?
The future would be dependent upon what the states would want it to be. I know that answer is a bit vague, but that is what I honestly believe. And I'm of the opinion that the future of multilateralism and international trade will be much more fragmented, because it is undoubted that in the next few years the international order will be a multipolar system. That is undoubted. So it will be much more fragmented. But however, this will therefore avail an opportunity for countries to be more diplomatic in their engagement, seek solutions that necessitates for diplomacy, for engagement, because it is definitely going to be a multipolar, fragmented international order.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Kahozi, for shedding light on this issue of multilateralism. Now we take a break, but coming up, we look at how human settlement is evolving. Stay with us. Welcome back. This is the Inside Scoop on Global TV. You're with me, Jacqueline Kitamba. Remember, you can send in your thoughts on our social media pages. The handle is @InsideScoop. The hashtag is #InsideScoopLive. Across the world, cities are expanding at an unpredictable rate. By 2025, nearly 70% of the global population will live in urban areas. But as population grows, governments are struggling to keep up with the housing demands. From overcrowding to skyrocketing rent prices, millions are left without access to affordable housing, forcing them into informal settlements and slums. Akot Alwenge with the details.
In cities like Nairobi, Lagos, Mumbai, and Sao Paulo, rapid urbanization has created a housing crisis. Demand far exceeds supply, leaving low-income families with few options. We spoke to residents, city planners, and housing experts about the reality of urban expansion. Like millions of others, she lives in an informal settlement where running water, sanitation, and electricity are scarce. With Nairobi's growing population, the city is struggling to provide the most basic infrastructure for its citizens. In Nairobi, several challenges hinder the development of affordable housing. The high cost of land in urban areas makes it difficult for developers to construct affordable units at reasonable prices. Lengthy approval processes for housing developments can delay construction processes and even increase costs. Additionally, inadequate infrastructure and outdated urban planning further exacerbate housing shortage. The result: a growing divide between the rich and the poor, where low-income residents are pushed further from city centers, increasing their daily commute and limiting their economic opportunities. The Kenyan government has launched ambitious affordable housing projects aiming to construct 500,000 units by 2022. However, due to insufficient financing, unaffordable mortgages, and a lack of available land for development, only about 3% of the target was achieved by the end of 2022.
With urban populations continuing to rise, the housing crisis is only set to worsen. Can cities like Nairobi find sustainable solutions, or will millions be left behind on this urban race? Reporting for the Inside Scope, I am Akwata Luen.
We now turn our attention to climate change and its devastating impact on Kenya and the African continent, from prolonged droughts in the Horn of Africa to the devastating floods in the Western and Central Africa. Climate change is no longer a distant threat. It is a present reality. Extreme weather patterns are displacing communities, disrupting agriculture, and threatening food security for millions. Our correspondent with the details.
In Kenya, the effects of climate change are being felt in real time. In the north, severe droughts have left millions without food and water, while in other parts of the country, heavy rainfall has led to deadly floods. Across Africa, the story is the same. Rising temperatures, failing crops, and extreme weather patterns are becoming more frequent and severe. Scientists warn that if urgent action is not taken, the continent could face irreversible damage.
Africa, like many regions in the world, is warming faster. To give a number, so the actual rate of warming over the last decade is 0.3, which is higher than what we had before.
The crisis is not only affecting rural communities in major cities like Nairobi, Accra, and Lagos. Climate change is worsening in air pollution, causing water shortages and increasing the risk of diseases outbreaks. African nations are calling for global cooperation, arguing that they bear the brunt of a crisis they did not create.
When I think about climate change, I think about human rights. You can't talk about climate change without having a human rights lens.
Experts warn that Africa, despite contributing the least to global carbon emissions, is suffering the most from the consequences. The question remains, can African nations adapt in time to prevent a full-scale climate catastrophe? Reporting from the Inside Scope, I am Marco Rio.
We are now joined by a climate expert who will focus on Africa's climate resilience. Thank you for joining us. Now, my first question would be, how did we reach this crisis point?
Africa as a continent is heavily affected by the issue of climate change. One of the main reasons why is the socioeconomic challenges that we face as a continent. Widespread poverty, reliance on rain-fed agriculture, and limited infrastructure leads to Africa not having the tools and the capacity needed to mitigate this issue at hand. We also have the rise in temperature, changing precipitation patterns, which may at hand lead to rising sea levels. Some countries have communities situated along the coastal line. When the sea levels rise, that may affect these communities because they might be prone to flooding, which leads to erosion of the land that they are situated on, which at hand leads to these communities having to be displaced. Climate affects agriculture and food security. Most people in Africa rely on farming as a way of income. Due to this climate change, we have low yields of the food that is produced, leading to farmers having less and less money to support their families. Food insecurity is also a major issue due to the lack of food, which may lead to malnutrition, which heavily affects the communities in the continent.
Now, do you believe that Kenya and Africa as a large can mitigate the effects of climate change, or is it already too late?
Yes, mitigation is possible, though a bit challenging. Africa as a continent has low carbon emissions, approximately 4%, and even if we will suffer due to our prior emissions, we can still pursue a low carbon emitting development path. Kenya, as one of the countries in Africa, has a high abundance of renewable energy, such as solar, wind, and geothermal. This abundance of this can help us reduce the reliance on fossil fuels and move towards this path that will lead to less and less carbon emissions into the atmosphere. We have the policies that have been put in place, such as the NDCs, and international support to aid the transition from one path to another. Initiatives such as the Green Climate Fund have been put in place to help this transition.
Well, thank you so much for shedding light on this issue of climate change. That is all the time we had for you today. Thank you for staying with us. This has been the Inside Scoop on Global TV with me, Jacqueline Kitamba. Until next time, stay connected.